Take photograph. On behalf of the Community Human Rights and Advocacy Center and the Kashmir Institute of International Relations, it is both an honor and a moral imperative to welcome you all to this crucial sideline event, Human Rights in the Context of Armed Conflict. We gather here not just to speak, but to break the silence, a silence that today echoes louder than the cries of those trapped under occupation, locked under siege, and left unheard in this shadow of militarized power. Conflict does not just kill, it destroys dignity. It tears families from each other, shatters homes, and extinguishes it criminalizes resistance, silences the truth, and turns the instrument of law into the tool of oppression. And amid this devastation, it is always the most vulnerable, the children, the women, and elderly who suffer first and who suffer the most. This event is more than a seminar. It is a platform, a piercing call to conscience, to center the stories, struggles, and rights of those whose humanity has been trampled in the fog of war. Our lens today is Kashmir, a region bleeding in silence for over 7 decades, a land of beauty turned into a garrison, a people subjected to surveillance, disappearances, torture, mass graves, and the suffocating silence of media blackouts. These are not mere allegations, these are wounds on the conscience of our international system. But Kashmir is not alone. From Gaza to Myanmar, from Sudan to Ukraine, across continents and cultures, the same story repeats. Human rights are not collateral damage of war, they are the first target. And our purpose today is twofold and urgent. One, to expose the entrenched systematic violations occurring in conflict zones, especially in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, committed in the name of security but rooted in impunity. And two, to demand what is long overdue, an international accountability, political courage, and reaffirmation of our shared humanity. Because let us be clear, silence in the face of suffering is not neutrality, it is complicity. As we listen to our distinguished panelists, voices of legal truth, journalistic bravery, grassroots resistance, and diplomatic wisdom, I urge you, do not listen passively. Listen as if lives depend on it, because they do. Listen with empathy, outrage, and with resolve. Because when global institutions fail to act in the face of justice, in the face of injustice, it is not because they lack tools, it is because they lack political will. Let this forum be more than a discussion. Let it be a defiant act of resistance against apathy, against injustice, and against the normalization of suffering. With these words, let's open the discussion. We are joined today by a distinguished panel of speakers who bring a wealth of knowledge and lived experience. I'm honored to introduce them to you one by one. Let us begin with Mr. Faiz Hussain Naqshbandi. He is representative of Community Human Rights and Advocacy Center. He has a background in law and policy. Mr. Naqshbandi has been instrumental in documenting rights abuses and advocating for international accountability. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Ma'am Moderator. Good morning to everybody. Human rights in armed conflict are protected under both international human rights law and international humanitarian law. While international humanitarian law, particularly the Geneva Convention of 1949 and its protocols, govern conduct during armed conflict. International human rights law, through its instruments such as International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, remain applicable at all times, including during emergencies and armed conflict. Human rights in armed conflict, especially in areas under foreign occupation is a serious challenge for the international community. Let me put some light on occupied Jammu and Kashmir, which is a UN recognized disputed territory, and the situation there presents grave and ongoing challenges to the international human rights organizations and humanitarian legal order. Despite its disputed status and international commitments through the UN Security Council resolutions, India continued its occupation of the Jammu and Kashmir through its repressive, violent, and unlawful means. India is a party to ICCPR and other 4 human rights treaties and is thus legally obliged to uphold the rights enshrined therein, even in the areas of armed conflict such as Kashmir. Accordingly, Indian military and the paramilitary forces are responsible for widespread human rights violations, including arbitrary detention, torture, enforced disappearances, sexual violence, and extrajudicial killings. These acts contravene the core principle of common article of the Geneva Conventions, which prohibits violence to life and person, including cruel treatment and torture of persons. The international community of Red Cross recognized the application of international humanitarian law in Kashmir conflict. Further, the use of draconian laws such as Armed Forces Special Powers Act and the Public Safety Act has facilitated a culture of impunity, violating Article 6, 7, and 9 of ICCPR relating to the right to life, the prohibition of torture, and the right to liberty and security. The reports of the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in 2018 and 2019 have documented systematic use of force, torture in custody, collective punishment, and a failure to investigate and prosecute abuses in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The continued denial of the right to self-determination to the people of Kashmir, affirmed in the General Assembly Resolution 1514, and as a code norm of international law, constitute a foundational violation of the human rights. The imposition of the military control and demographic changes following the abrogation of Article 370 and 35A of the Indian Constitution in August 2019 further intensified India's breach of international obligations, including under the 4th Geneva Convention relating to the protection of the civilian population under occupation. Ladies and gentlemen, there is an urgent need for a UN-mandated commission of inquiry to investigate and prosecute the systematic and widespread human rights violations in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. With this, I thank you all. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much, for your time. Next, we have Mr. Robert Fantina. He's a highly respected journalist and writer from Canada, and he has written extensively on issues of war, imperialism, and human rights. His perspective today promises to offer a compelling international lens on conflict and counterfeit. He'll be joining us on Zoom.
Thank you, and good day. I'm grateful to be part of this distinguished panel today. I have written extensively about the similarities of India's colonial project in Kashmir and Israel's in
Excuse me, you're not
Palestine.
coming through, okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Do you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Good day. I'm grateful to be part of this distinguished panel today. I have written extensively about the similarities of India's colonial project in Kashmir and Israel's in Palestine. The more I learn and the more time that passes, the more similar those two ugly projects are proven to be. It is no secret that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. If we didn't have the carefully documented facts from Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, the United Nations Rapporteur for the Occupied Palestinian Territories, Francesca Albanese, we all have phones and computers and have watched these horrors unfold for more than 20 months. Although the corporate-owned, government-controlled Western media is easily distracted from any focus on the horrendous violence of human rights and international law that Israel commits moment by moment in Palestine, there is at least an occasional report from Gaza and sometimes even from the West Bank. Yet Kashmir is all but ignored, despite the people of Kashmir having experienced the same kind and degree of repression that the Palestinians have endured for over 70 years. Humaira Malik, writing in Pakistan Vision in June of 2024, said, quote, "Throughout the years, the Indian military in Kashmir has been involved in extensive human rights abuses, such as unlawful killing, sexual assault, acts of torture, and deliberate acts on healthcare personnel." Close quote. For years, Kashmiris were able to connect with the outside world through social media. This was disrupted when India caused an internet blackout on August of 2019 that came to be the longest internet blackout in history. The purpose was obvious: to prevent the world from seeing what was happening in Kashmir. But what was happening and what is happening now? According to Human Rights Watch, since the abrogation of Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, ending Jammu and Kashmir's so-called special autonomous status on August 5th of 2019, freedom of speech and freedom of assembly have been curtailed. According to a BBC report of August 31st of 2023, just 4 years after the abrogation, one journalist still reporting in Kashmir said, quote, "We live in fear that any story could be our last," close quote. This mirrors the situation in Palestine. On June 16th of this year, the Committee to Protect Journalists said that their preliminary investigation indicates that at least 185 journalists and media workers have been killed in Gaza in the last 20 months. Again, the motivation is clear: to prevent the world from seeing Israel committing genocide. Arbitrary detention is commonplace in Kashmir. Under Indian law, people can be held for up to 2 years without charge. In Palestine, it is 6 months with unlimited 6-month extensions. Like Israel, India can extend the detentions through immediate rearrests. Amnesty International, in its 2024 report, wrote this, quote, "The Indian authorities are using arbitrary restrictions and punitive actions to create a climate of fear in Jammu and Kashmir. Anyone daring to speak out, whether to criticize the government or to stand up for human rights, faces a clampdown on their rights of freedom of expression and association and are unable to move freely within and outside the country." Close quote. Haaretz, the prominent Israeli newspaper, recently reported that multiple IDF soldiers are reporting that, quote, "they were ordered by commanders to fire at unarmed civilians who were approaching food distribution sites during off hours, even when the crowds posed no threat." Close quote. When starving people know that they risk being shot when seeking food from the source that is both providing the food and shooting them, the climate of fear is beyond imagination. The methods used by both Indian soldiers in Kashmir and Israeli soldiers in Palestine are all but the same. The Human Rights Watch report I mentioned a moment ago also said this about conditions in Kashmir. Quote, "Troops have engaged in reprisal attacks against civilians, assaults on medical workers, rape, torture, and arson." Close quote. Attacks against civilians in Palestine, both in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, have resulted in at least 60,000 deaths, with some estimates putting the number well in excess of 100,000 and the killing continues. In Kashmir, while the death toll isn't as high, by August of 2023, conservative estimates were that at least 800 Kashmiri civilians had been killed by Indian forces, and as in Palestine, the slaughter continues. Regarding sexual violence mentioned in the Human Rights Watch report on Kashmir, a United Nations report from March of this year includes the following, quote, UN Human Rights Council probe alleges sexual violence against Palestinians by Israeli forces is used as a method of war, and that the targeting of reproductive health care facilities amounts to two categories of genocidal acts in the Roman Statute of the Geneva Convention. Further, in a statement accompanying the release of the UN Human Rights Council Commission's report, it asserted that forced public stripping and nudity, sexual harassment, including threats of rape, as well as sexual assault, were standard operating procedure of the Israeli security forces toward Palestinians. Indian forces have a long history of using arson against Kashmiris, burning of crops and houses. In more than a few instances, Indian soldiers fire on civilians fleeing burning buildings, forcing them to choose between the risk of dying by fire or gunshot. Again, we see both India and Israel using the same tactics and violating the same international laws against the people of Kashmir and the people of Palestine. A basic democratic principle is self-determination, the inherent right for people to choose the form of government under which they will live. In 1948, the United Nations Security Council Resolution 47 stated clearly that the status of Kashmir was to be based on this principle, although to a limited degree. It says in part, quote, that the question of the accession of Jammu and Kashmir to India or Pakistan should be decided through the democratic method of a free and impartial plebiscite, close quote. It also said that this plebiscite was to be held promptly. In the 75 years since that resolution was passed, India has never allowed that plebiscite to happen. In Palestine, talk of a ceasefire, the governance of the Gaza Strip, the future of the West Bank and Jerusalem were all discussed by the United States, Israel, and several Arab countries in the Middle East. The missing voices are those of the Palestinians themselves. Since the abrogation, Indian nationals have flooded into Kashmir. They now hold all the major government positions. This is rapidly changing the democratic composition of Kashmir, altering it from a Kashmiri, mainly Muslim country to an Indian Hindu one. Once that change has been irrevocably made, perhaps India will allow the plebiscite, knowing that the majority Hindu population will vote to become part of India. In Palestine, at least 700,000 illegal settlers now live in the West Bank, and the government of the Zionist regime has stated that none will ever be required to leave. These are just some of the massive and appalling injustices that the people of Kashmir and Palestine experience on a daily basis and have been experiencing for decades. These are the crimes against humanity that many of the world's governments choose to overlook. Our role is to be spokespeople, advocates and activists working to defeat the racist, repressive policies of India against Kashmir and Israel against Palestine. History will judge harshly those who are committing these atrocities. It will be no less harsh on those of us who do not stand up against them. Thank you.
Mr. Cantina rightly pointed out the striking similarities between the situation in Pakistan and Indian Kashmir, both of which are under occupation. Joining us now is Ms. Sayyeda Tehreem Bukhari, Associate Director at the Center of International Strategic Studies in Pakistan, administered Jammu and Kashmir. Ms. Bukhari offers both academic rigor and political analysis on the intersection of security and human rights, especially from the gendered perspective. Tehreem will be joining us through Zoom as well.
Delegates, scholars, and human rights defenders, I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak on deeply urgent issue, the breakdown of human rights in conflict zones, with a focus not only on Indian administered Kashmir, but also on the spillover effect in Azad Kashmir. Following the April 22 Pahalgam massacre, where 26 civilians, mostly tourists, were killed, rather than focusing on counter-terrorism, what was followed was an indiscriminate crackdown across Indian-occupied Kashmir. According to the New York Times and BBC News, over 3,000 Kashmiris were detained, more than 1,500 in the initial wave alone. Many were held without formal charges under sweeping anti-terror laws like Public Safety Act and Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, both denounced by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch for enabling indefinite detention without trial. These were not transparent, legally accountable arrests. They were mass detentions, often without warrants or individual suspicion. And that raises a serious question. Is this a justice or is it a retribution? The repression that went beyond arrest, according to Human Rights Watch, the Indian state has repeatedly used collective punishment in Kashmir, a practice explicitly prohibited under Article 33 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. In the aftermath of Pahalgam, homes of alleged suspects were demolished without trial or court orders. Entire family, including children and the elderly, were rendered homeless. In Pulwama, even adjacent homes not under suspicion suffered a damage from demolition drives. The former Chief Justice of Jammu and Kashmir, he also noticed that demolishing a house without judicial approval is not only illegal, it is unconstitutional and in violation of international norms. What began in the valley soon spread across India. From Punjab to Uttarakhand and from Delhi to Himachal Pradesh, Kashmiri students and vendors, they were subjected to physical assault, threats and forced evictions, refusal of accommodation, and commercial discrimination. In Delhi University, Kashmiri students were instructed to submit personal data, including Aadhaar numbers and local addresses, a move many condemned as an institutional profiling. One student shared that this feels like an apartheid, not based on behavior, but simply because where we were born. According to Amnesty International, such incidents are a part of systematic pattern of targeting Kashmiris and Muslims across India, particularly in the wake of violence, irrespective of their involvement. Between April 22 and May 8, the report recorded that 184 hate crimes were committed across India, including 84 incidents of hate speech, 39 assaults, 19 acts of vandalism, and 3 murders. This is not merely a case of scattered violence, it reflects a deliberate environment of impunity, where hate is not only allowed to thrive, it is filmed, shared, and in some cases politically justified. Distinguished delegates, the human rights violations we have discussed so far are not confined to Indian administered Kashmir. On May 7, 2025, India launched a coordinated missile and drone attack on several sites in Pakistan administered Kashmir, striking well beyond the line of control and most critically, striking civilians. Despite India's claim of targeting militant infrastructure, independent reports and eyewitnesses' testimonies confirm that civilian spaces were directly hit, including mosques, hospitals, residential homes. According to Pakistani authorities and verified reporting from The Guardian and the Associated Press and The Nation, the following civilian casualties occurred. In Kotli, the Masjid Abbas was struck during a prayer time, killing two teenagers, including a 16-year-old girl. In Muzaffarabad, Masjid-e-Bilal was damaged, injuring multiple civilians, including a young girl. In Rawalakot, strike hit residential neighborhood, killing at least 5 civilians and damaging over a dozen homes. In Shikargarh, a dispensary, primary or healthcare unit was destroyed, depriving the local population of basic medical access and injuring multiple non-combatants. In total, at least 31 civilians were killed and more than 46 injured across the Pakistan-administered Kashmir and bordering Pakistani regions. Many of them were women and children. Satellite imagery and local documentation show no evidence of military activity at the site or location. Under the Geneva Convention, hospitals, religious sites, and civilian infrastructures, they are classified as a protected objects in armed conflict. Article 18 of the Fourth Geneva Convention stated that civilian hospitals may in no circumstances be the object of attack. Article 53 prohibits attack on places of worships unless they are being used for military purposes, a threshold not merely met in these cases. Moreover, indiscriminate attacks that fail to distinguish between civilian and military targets violate the customary international humanitarian law, the Rome Statute of International Criminal Court, and fundamental principles of proportionality and distinction. The May 7 strikes in Pakistan-administered Kashmir were not the isolated incidents. They represent dangerous pattern of cross-border retaliation that disregards civilian life, turning mosques into rubbles, hospitals into ruins, and homes into graves. These are not the collateral damages. They are human rights violations that demand independent investigation and international accountability. Let's examine what this means in legal terms. The action we have discussed violate the core provisions of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and critically, the Fourth Geneva Convention, Article 33, which stated, no protected person may be punished for an offense that he or she has not personally committed. Reprisal against protected persons and their property are prohibited. Mass detention, demolition without due process, and targeting of students and vendors, it violates both domestic and international law. Distinguished delegates, what we are witnessing in Kashmir is not counterinsurgency, it is counter-humanity. Security concerns can never justify the erosion of civil liberties nor the abandonment of legal process. When a state begins to punish its people for not what they have done, but for who they are, it fortifies a moral legitimacy. Let us be clear, peace without justice is submission, not reconciliation. Counterterrorism without accountability only breeds deeper unrest. As an international community committed to justice and peace, we must now act. We must demand an independent international investigation into human rights abuse post Pahalgam. We must call for the immediate repeal of laws like PSA and UAPA. We must ensure protection of students, civilians, and displaced families across the region. And above all, we must uphold the rule of law in all armed conflicts without exception. But there is one more moral principle, one that must be reaffirmed here today. The people of Jammu and Kashmir are not merely victims, they are the right holders. Among the rights clearly stated in United Nations Security Council Resolution 47, 91, and 122 is the right to self-determination. The right to decide their political future, their governance, their destiny is not a favor to be granted. It is a legal, moral, and political obligation the international community must uphold. As long as the right remains denied, peace will remain fragile and justice incomplete. Let this forum not be a witness in silence, but a voice for dignity, accountability, and above all, freedom. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Naheem, for highlighting how the people of Kashmir are facing severe problems. Tahreem to aptly put it in how the collective punishment in Kashmir post Pahalgam is a grave concern. Now, I will call upon Ms. Rehana Ali, who is a lawyer, human rights activist, and a passionate voice for justice. She has spent years defending the rights of women and children affected by the armed conflict. Rehana, the floor is yours. She'll be joining us via Zoom as well.
Thank you. May peace be upon you, respectable guest, honorable advocates and organizers. I will begin by saying thanks to United Nations and all the bodies who are standing by United Nations for this opportunity. I begin by saying, in the smoke of wars or the bullet of armed conflicts, the first casualty is truth, and the next is the murder of human dignity destroyed by mass violence in the name of self-defense. One second. Sorry, the screen is a bit stuck, so yes, okay. Today, I rise not only to speak about war, but armed conflict, a graver, often silent assault on humanity. Unlike conventional wars between states and soldiers, armed conflicts target civilians, the defenseless people made into pawns. Women face rape as a weapon of war. Children, innocent minds are scarred, twisted into fear. Adults and elderly die watching horrors unfold they once prayed would never return, and worst of all, these victims are forgotten. Their only crime was to plead for peace. Armed conflicts are now one of the greatest threats to global human rights. Sadly, the world hesitates to address the root causes. Why? Perhaps because we have normalized ignoring long-standing unsolved issues in the world like Kashmir and Palestine, despite the case of United Nations Security Council resolutions. When these conflicts are ignored, we send a dangerous message that international law, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Geneva Conventions, the humanitarian law, can be breached without consequences. Silence becomes complicity. The result. Civilians are detained, displaced, bombed, exiled, and migration. The aftershocks shake not only the developing regions but the so seekers arrived by by notice or choice, not choice but desperation. The world's duty is that the international community must act, not merely speak. I urge the following. Justice must be enforced through the United Nations and the International Criminal Court. War criminals must be held accountable without delay, exception, or political excuse. Aid workers and human rights defenders must be bans on violator states, even if they are members of the Security Council, upholding the Universal Declaration of Human Rights adopted on 10 December 1948 demands integrity, not self-enforcement. Even in the times of war, human rights are not suspended. The right to life, dignity, and safety is everywhere. It is alarming that Palestine and Kashmir, both flashpoints since 1948, remain unsolved. Their people deny justice while global focus enters elsewhere. The cries of these siblings of pain, because I call Palestine and Kashmir siblings of pain because they have been suffering since 1948, are too often muted by geopolitics. Why is the world leaders rally for Ukraine but remain silent on Palestine, Israel, not as allies but as a parallel power using similar strategies of occupation, annexion, and collective punishment? This is not security. This is pure genocide, and we must shout out genocide. Kashmir is one of the most militarized zones on the earth. Since 1948, it has been under dispute, yet the people are treated as criminals in their own homeland. Why are they treated like that? They are suffering curfews, communication blackouts, illegal detention under laws like PSA, Public Safety Act, and UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, even targeting younger children below the age of 10. AFSAFA, which is called Armed Forces Special Powers Act, a law granting immunity to soldiers known famously as rape law and license to kill. Public Safety Act has been called a lawless law by the Amnesty International, and that was stated in 2010. British era sedition laws still used in India, abolished long time ago in UK, and that is the law which India has actually in its constitution, which is called Indian Penal Act, Section 124 and Section 121. It's still used on minorities, especially Kashmiris and Indian Muslims and Sikhs. The youth and the political leaders and the journalists are suffering, and most of them are in notorious jails like the Jail in India and in different parts of India. Leeching, silencing, and making sure that the Kashmiri identity is forgotten or Kashmiris accept that they're part of India is becoming a norm. Under the Modi-led BJP RSS regime, human rights defenders, Sikh and Kashmiri freedom voices have been targeted not only in India or Kashmir, but across the globe, including Pakistan, UK, Canada, and America. And we all remember that I think it was last year or so when the Canadian Prime Minister confronted India and actually asked India to stop its ongoing killings, murdering in Canada. This is a dangerous expert of Hindutva extremism, echoing a Nazism-inspired version of a greater Akhand Bharat, because they both want Akhand Bharat, and that can only be done by committing genocide and stealing different state lands. The India Out campaigns in Maldives and Bangladesh were direct responses to this ideology in South Asia. India's breach of the Indus Water Treaty affecting water that belongs to Kashmir, not India, is another provocation risking future wars, and India introducing wars on water wars, which the world must unite and make sure that India does not commit this crime or is going to be showing the way to other states. This is no longer just a regional issue. This is a global humanitarian crisis making its way up. I would also like to add that we all understand that India that India is not only violating international laws, India is also violating its own constitution. All these black laws or all these draconian acts and laws are against India's own constitution, which is a mockery of its constitution. And we all understand that the 18 security and we all understand that the 18 past United Nations Security Council resolutions are above any agreement between India and Pakistan, and we do also understand and we welcome that Pakistan has voided the Shimla agreement, which was made in 19, and the Kashmiris were given no right to raise their voices against it. And the other important issue which I would like to highlight is that India is making sure that it carries on with these geographical changes, is making sure that it's replacing the Kashmiris, and is making sure that Indians are being brought into Kashmir, which is against the 4th Geneva Convention, Article 49, which says that forced displacement or the deportation of protected people, which is Article 5, is not allowed. And India has been doing this since it has revoked Article 370 and 35A to reoccupy Kashmir. And the other important factor before I go towards the conclusion is that Kashmiris have been separated from their own families just before India and Pakistani war started, which is a violation of the state subject of Kashmir, and is a violation of international laws, because Kashmir is not a part of India under the 18 under the 18 past United Nations Security Council resolutions. Going towards the conclusion, human rights do not end at the breakout of war. They begin with the cry of the first victim. Let's not be the voice of pity, but of power. Let's not pray for peace, but fight for justice. Let's not forget where dignity is denied, our shared humanity is on trial. And many thanks for giving me the opportunity to pass my thoughts on Kashmir and speak about the laws and the violations being committed in Kashmir. And the same violations are committed in Palestine, as we know that Israel and India are working together as not only allies, they're using the same tactics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rahana. Although there were some glitches during your speech, but that was a very powerful one. And thank you very much for also telling the House how the women, some of them are older than 70 years, have been separated from their families and sent to live with their relatives. They do not know what is happening to their families back in Indian High Kashmir. Thank you for highlighting their plea as well. Now I will call upon Mr. Ghulam Muhammad Safi, convener of the All Parties Hurriyat Conference, APAC, and representative of World Muslim Congress. He is a seasoned diplomat and advocate for the rights of Kashmir. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Moderation for the panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Human rights are the very essence of our life. They are the rights inherent to all of us, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other state. These rights include the right to life and liberty, freedom from slavery and torture, freedom of opinion and expression, and the right to work and education. Yet, in times of armed conflict, these rights are often the first to be trampled upon. Armed conflicts bring with them devastating loss of civilian life, massive displacement, and egregious violations of human rights and international humanitarian law. International humanitarian law exists to minimize human suffering, to protect civilians, and to safeguard combatants who are no longer part of hostilities, such as prisoners of war. However, the reality is that some of the gravest human rights violations occur during war. We see the use of rape as a weapon of war, the recruitment of children to fight on the frontier, direct attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure, and indiscriminate or disproportionate attacks. These are not just violations. These are war crimes, willful killings, torture, the use of prohibited weapons, and the murder of ill-treatment of prisoners of war are the crimes that stain the conscience of humanity. But the horrors do not end here. Crimes against humanity, such as murder, extermination, enslavement, forcible transfer of population, torture, rape, and forced disappearances, and apartheid are committed not only during the armed conflicts, but also in times of peace, often under the guise of combating extremism and terrorism. Today, I draw your attention to two glaring examples of such crimes against humanity: Palestine and Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. In both regions, occupying powers have systematically violated the rights of the people, leaving behind a trail of devastation. Mr. Gregory Stanton, the chief of Genocide Watch, has warned that Jammu and Kashmir is on the verge of genocide. This is not a statement to be taken lightly. The two reports, and those already mentioned here by Sayyid Naqshbandi, those reports were published by the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in 2018 and 2019. Those reports shed light on the harrowing situation in Kashmir. These reports document the devastating loss of civilian life, massive displacement, torture, and widespread human rights violations. The reports highlight the continued use of pellet-firing shotguns, a prohibited arsenal, which have blinded and maimed countless civilians. They speak of arbitrary detentions, restrictions on freedom of expression, and the suppression of freedom of assembly and association in this heavily militarized, UN-recognized disputed territory, Jammu and Kashmir. The UN reports made clear recommendations They called on India to respect the right to self-determination of the Kashmiri people as protected under international law. They urged India to conduct independent, impartial, and credible investigations into all unmarked mass graves and civilian killings since July 2016. They also demanded the urgent repeal of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which grants Indian forces unchecked power to kill Kashmiris with impunity. Yet, these recommendations remain unheeded. The people of Jammu and Kashmir continue to suffer under occupation, their voices silenced, their rights denied. To conclude, let me say this. The protection of human rights is not a choice. It's an obligation. It's the duty we owe to every human being in times of peace and in times of war. The world cannot turn a blind eye to the suffering in Kashmir. We must stand together to ensure that the rights of the Kashmiri people are safeguarded, that justice is served, and that the principles of humanity and dignity prevail. We know that an unresolved issue of Jammu and Kashmir, sparked off a war, an armed conflict between India and Pakistan very recently. And if the issue of Jammu and Kashmir is not resolved in accordance with the wishes of the people of the state of Jammu and Kashmir and in accordance with the UN Security Council resolution, there is every apprehension of a nuclear war between India and Pakistan. Only because of the issue of Jammu and Kashmir and pending issue of Jammu and Kashmir and the right of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Everyone has said here. We must pause here to acknowledge the immense suffering of women who have been forced to leave their homes and families in Jammu and Kashmir, the head of the women who are newly married, elderly, and mothers to young children being uprooted from one home is a trauma that leaves everlasting scars. It is not just a physical displacement, it is a loss of identity, dignity, and a sense of belonging. These women were not outsiders. They belong to the very land of Jammu and Kashmir. What they are enduring goes against every principle of humanity, justice, and the law. We must remember that behind every number is a face, a voice, a story, and often a mother, a daughter, or a wife yearning to return home. Their resilience must be honored and their rights must be restored. Whether you are a policymaker, activist, scholar, or a citizen, your voice has a place in this movement. Let us carry what we have heard today beyond this room into the work, into our writing, into our conversation. That matters. Thank you very much. We'll conclude here today. Right. That's okay. We have time, so we'll open the house for the question and answer. So, if anyone has a question, please introduce yourself. Yes. Professor, why is it a long time in the space of nothing of the
Well, the issue of the conflict of the problem of Jammu and Kashmir has remained unresolved, mainly because of Indian observation. India agreed to a UN-conducted plebiscite to determine the fate and future of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. But with the passage of time, India started calling Jammu and Kashmir its integral part. Only because, according to India, the people participated in various elections. Our question to India is, can an election in presence of occupational forces in one part of the entire territory be recognized as a substitute for what has been promised to the people, that is, a vote under the auspices of United Nations, not under the auspices of Indian Election Commission. We had been promised an election conducted by the United Nations, a referendum or a plebiscite. But India says, since the people of Jammu and Kashmir have participated in so many elections conducted by the Indian Election Commission, so that is the penalty. That was the promise made to the people of Jammu and Kashmir, which is not true. So the Indian obduracy on the one hand, secondly, the lukewarm attitude of the big powers, that also contributed to this unresolved issue of women. The United Nations could not implement its resolutions. That was the third angle of this tragedy. So these various things combined together made the issue of Jammu and Kashmir what it is now.
We still have 6 minutes to go, so if there are any other questions, we are happy to help. Any questions? So as there are no more questions, I hereby conclude this today's meeting. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Thank you.
Yeah.